Welcome back. So here we are with the fourth video for Module 9. And this is Chapter 10. And we're dealing with object-oriented design. And we've talked about OOD, we talked about classes and objects and inheritance and attributes and what methods are. But in this video, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into methods. It should be pretty short. And there's not a ton that I'm going to pull out of here that I'm going to ask of you when it comes to quizzes or a graded notebook. But conceptually, at this point, you should have a grasp on what a method is. We look at attributes as, if we thought of a cat, attributes are ways to describe the cat. Methods are things the cat can do. Now, it's not an attribute, it's an action. So, the methods that we've dealt with could be, performing a calculation, returning some value, whatever it may be. But methods break down into essentially three different types. And the first one is something that we've dealt with before. And in that method, let's think about the init method. And in the init method, when we looked at it, it had a self value first, and then it could potentially have other values or other arguments being passed to it. So that's the first type of method. It's an instance method. Now the next method, and let's talk about that a little bit deeper once I get through these three. So the next method type is a class method, and it's preceded by that @ symbol, class method decorator. So it's a decorator, and I didn't want to dig deep into what a decorator is or how it works, because that is beyond what we really need to be doing in here. But when you see that @ symbol, such as @class method, that's a decorator to indicate what's coming up. Now, if we see @class method, it's a class method. Its first argument should be CLS or anything. It's just not the reserved word class. Okay. That refers to itself. And then we've got a third type, which is a static method, and it should also have a decorator, the static method decorator. And I'll dig deeper into what a static method is here in a second. So let's go talk about instance methods. So instance methods, as I said, that first argument is self. And that points back to the instance of the object, or the instance of the class, the object itself. These are things that essentially you would create when you're creating your own classes, pointing back and being clear that what is it that's being referenced here, and it's self. It's the instance of the class or the object that's being passed in. So the system knows which instance of the class are we talking about here, because there may be multiple instances of, say, cat, and we need to have that self attribute passed so that the system knows, well, who are we dealing with here? Which object are we dealing with? And the self that's that value that's being passed. Okay. So those are instance methods, and they have to have that first parameter as self. Right? Now, class methods as I said, you'll have that decorator in front of it. Um, Here's an example of it, and we had, I guess, something like this before. We've got a class called A, doesn't receive any arguments directly, but it receives the name of the object in init. So what kind of method is this one right here? Well, that's what we just looked up here. That's an instance method. This is an instance method. Okay. This one is a class method. We're not passing it self. We're passing it CLS, or the class. Okay. Now, it's how we're accessing these things, and this isn't something that I'm going to quiz you on or ask you in the notebooks. I just wanted to go over it so you had an understanding of the different types and the terminology. Now, the last one is what we call a static method. And static, sometimes you'll see static used, the keyword static used when nothing's being returned. So we've got a method that doesn't return anything, it's just performing some work. In this context, we would use the @static method decorator up front. And these methods essentially, it's not the kind of thing that we're necessarily looking at it as it's going to be inherited by an object, or we're going to use it as an accessor or mutator or anything like that. This is just, there's a class, there's a method in it, and should we need to utilize that method, we can. And we access it directly to the class. We don't create an instance of the class. We use this class. So in this example, it's a Coyote weapon class. And all that Coyote weapon class does is, at this point, it's got this one method that prints something. That's it. Now, essentially, I could create an instance of it, but the intent with this is we're not. We'll just access it directly. Name of the class, method. And I call it, and it's static. Doesn't really return anything to me, it performs a task. And the task it performs is it invokes or calls the print method. That does some work and displays something there. But it's not the same kind of methods that we would see before in the previous couple. Here's another example. I've got a class called calculator, and calculator has some method in it that performs a calculation. Well, let me go create an instance. I can call calculator.addNumbers. I can call that if I wanted to, or I didn't do it with a decorator here. I can do it here as the static method. It's a method that I passed that method to, and it converts that method into a static method. Say print, product, and whatever that static method that I've created does. And boom, there it is. These static methods, it's usually something that we've got a specific task we want to perform, and I don't need to go through all the process of creating an instance of that class, create an object. We just need to access that functionality. And it already exists, so since it already exists, I can just reference it and use it. I don't have to create more code in my class or in anything that I'm building. I'm just referencing something that already exists and reusing it over and over again, potentially. Okay? That's the brunt of this video. I told you it was going to be short. Okay? Now, these methods, they perform work. They may provide you some value or provide you some service. They're built in depending on how they're defined. They may be hidden. There's a variety of different things that we've talked about before. I'm not going to dig too deep into the privacy aspect of the attributes from the previous module either. Okay. So I'll see you in the next, which is the final module for, or final video for module 9.